Good evening, viewers, and welcome to the Art with World. I am your host, Ejaz Rahim. Today, we are having a very prominent poet of Pakistan, Janab Ejaz Rahim Sahab, who writes in English language. First collection of his poems appeared in 1993, and so far, more than 25 books have been published, which include his poetry books and some views and reviews on his poetry. Welcome to our show, and thank you very much for sparing time for this program. How are you, sir?
Thank you, ARSHAD Saab. I'm very grateful to you. I'm very happy that you thought it appropriate to interview me. I'm very, very glad to be sitting with you.
There are so many things we need to discuss in this program, and we have only 50 minutes. You have served in Pakistan Civil Service, and you have written very good poetry. I need to ask in the first place, what were your early inspirations? How did you felt yourself inclined to poetry, and how did you discover a poet in yourself? Something, if you would like to share about your childhood memories, or when you were a student in Government College Lahore, I guess, and FC College Lahore, and later some in your service period, if you would like to share with us.
Thank you, sir. Actually, mine is a family from Kashmir, and we came and settled in Abbottabad. So there, the schooling that I got as a child was in Burnhall School, Abbottabad, which was a English public school, and it was dominated by, and in fact run by, the Mill Hill Fathers of London, and they were priests.
Okay.
And there, the accent was on the English language. So I was denied the privilege, I would say, of going through an education based in Urdu, and Urdu literature was also not taught at that school. So as a child, I remember I would write for the Pakistan Times, and they would publish my poems of a religious nature, sometimes on God, sometimes on the Holy Prophet, sometimes on Karbala. And I do remember my fascination with religion as a child, and those poems would appear now and then. I'm not so sure whether the headmaster, Father Scandon, was very enthused about it, but whenever a prize would come, he would call me to the office and say, Ejaz, you have won an award, so here is the thing. After that, I completed my senior Cambridge from Burnhall, and I went to Lahore, and there I did my FA from intermediate from FC College, then shifted. Everybody in Lahore said that government college is the thing. So they didn't like that. They said this is not an act of great loyalty, but I think the pressure of public opinion, I went and joined the Government College Lahore. I did my bachelor's and my master's in English literature from there. And I'll just add, as a beginner, to begin this interview, I must add that during that period of studentship, I did write occasional poetry, which was published in the Ravi. Ravi was a literary magazine of Government College Lahore. But I did not either plan that I would be writing a lot of poetry, and I took it really as a routine exercise of a student who learns English literature and then once in a while develops the thing. And I think that sums up the beginning.
So then you joined civil service. I guess it was 1969 you joined it. And then first collection of your poems came 1993, I guess?
Yes.
So this is a whole time. You kept writing during this time, and you went for some suitable time to get published, or you first wanted to settle in service and then get your book published later on?
If I try and recall those times, I don't have a very good memory, maybe because of age and other frailties. If I remember rightly, I had no interest in publishing my poetry in books. And 1993, I would say, gave me an opportunity to go, because some poems had started collecting over a period of time. And I'll be very honest with you that I came to this vocation of poetry accidentally. And maybe some friend would have told me, I remember my friend Professor Muzaffar Bukhari, who was interested in my work, and he would listen to me and he said, why not, we should publish a book. I think that probably was the impetus behind it. Otherwise, I had not. I don't think in Pakistan we have a very planned sort of approach to writing of poetry or writing of books, and I fall in that category. After that, I can only say that maybe after this first edition was published, and people like Professor Jilani Kamran and Professor Siddiq Kaleem was another of my teachers. They were both Urdu poets, so standing, but they were teachers of English language literature at the government college. I guess that put me on the line of then publishing my books, and I guess that's the story.
So you opted for writing in English language. Why so?
I've given my thought to this issue, and I will very honestly tell you that I'm one of those who believes that expression of the heart is only possible in one's mother language. This is my honest view. This is a conviction I've held over even my career. So then the question is, like you asked me, why did I go for English? And my answer is very simple, sir, that it's my schooling and the fact that I could not express myself in Urdu because I neither took it as a discipline nor during service gave that time to Urdu literature, be it novel or poetry. But poetry came naturally to me. I got interested in some poets initially, and perhaps I found my voice there in the English language. But let me say this, that I don't regret it very much when I look at the point that today 400 million people are native English speakers, but 1.9 billion people are others who either speak this language or understand this language. And I also know that English is the language of commerce, of diplomacy, of administration, of the constitution, and of culture, virtually global culture. And therefore, maybe I think that that's what didn't restrain me in the end. I thought that there is a sufficient audience in Pakistan, educated audience, that can lend an ear to what we are saying. And that's my honest answer to why I continued with writing in the English language.
Well, that makes sense. I can understand. I would also like to know who were the poets of classic age and modern times who you liked most and who influence your work, and maybe they influence your technique and worldview as well.
I remember that the first poet that I truly enjoyed, and I enjoyed because he is a poet who went into the issue of what is poetry, and that was Wordsworth, William Wordsworth. There are many romantic poets, but this was an outstanding man who gave his thought, and you know his famous preface to the lyrical ballads, where he says that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of emotions recalled in tranquility. And so I started giving thought to this issue. But later on, there were other issues about what is poetry, and that also began to interest me. For example, when I look at today's people, thought process, then today they say that it's not enough that emotion is the only guide and the only motor vehicle for poetry. Emotion and thought together make poetry, and I think that thought has prevailed in the way I approached emotion and thought, fusing them together in metaphor and simile to express what I have feel about nature and about man and about life. These are the three things one is genuinely interested in. So from Wordsworth, I went on to people like Rumi, for example, and I consider that as a very important, bringing these three elements together of word, the world, and man together. And the one poet that is universal is Shakespeare. And I will be very honest with you that if there is a poet who held fascination for me, and I consider his entire drama to be one single poem. That is how I approach Shakespeare. And
that's tragedy.
The depth of and the range and the beauty and the realism and the idealism that you have in Shakespeare, that is the poem. He is dealing with human beings, he's dealing with human society, he's dealing with questions, and he's dealing with answers through events that and he incorporates history as a very important point of, coming to conclusion. So Shakespeare, I think, if you ask me what made you stay in poetry, I will say it was Shakespeare. But then Wordsworth in the West and Rumi in the East. These are the people who kept me going. I started at an early age, and I've continued my interest in them.
Okay, great. Well, I am a huge admirer of Shakespeare too. So are you referring to his sonnets or all his plays and dramas and tragedies he has written?
Sir, it would be injustice to Shakespeare to say that his poetry is only in his sonnets. Sonnets is only a small asterisk in his work. The whole of Shakespearean plays, whether comedy or tragedy, is one single poem on human life and human destiny, and what are the binaries of life, and what are the joys of life, and what are the sorrows of life. This is what life is, and this is the stuff of poetry. And so sonnets I've enjoyed, but believe me, I did not mean the sonnets. I meant the whole of Shakespeare as a single poem.
You have just said that Shakespeare has used historical events and made them plays, and they're great plays, in fact. All his plays are great plays. So is that one reason that you also use history in your poetry?
I think it's a very good question you've raised, and I want to reflect on this for a moment. Why do I use history? And sir, I will tell you that there has been an evolution in my thought about poetry over the years also. I began with metaphors which are beautiful and which I thought summed up what my first reaction to life. So that's the first phase of my poetry. And that's closer to Wordsworthian lines when he says that, "To me alone there came a thought of grief. A timely utterance gave that thought relief, and I again am strong."
Oh.
So utterance, in other words, language. When you have emotion and you find language, then it has effect. So this is what he says. Today, I think that over the years I have learned that only language and only emotion and even only thought is not enough. These have to be brought together in a poem and in a book of verse or in poetry in life. And I am now greatly of the view that just the lyric will not be able to answer this challenge. Poetry also has a challenge, the meaning of life. And I am very, very much influenced by Rokesa and her book. She's a major poet today in the American field of letters. And she's written this book, The Life of Poetry. And in that she says that today poetry has become a platform where you must wrestle with the whole of human knowledge, whether it is scientific knowledge, or whether it is theological knowledge, or whether it is artistic knowledge, or whether it is any knowledge. How do they combine to give guidance or to get effect from? life of the poet, life of poetry. And so this idea of the poetry as a uniform for all human knowledge, that has, and that has led me to the epic, because it is the epic where the drama comes in, where the clash comes in, where there is this, you had used the word of binary, where the binaries come in, and then you see, is there something that comes out in the end, or does it remain binary from beginning to end? That's a very important question, sir. And therefore, for me, poetry became a serious thing. Poetry became a matter not only of aesthetic experience of language and emotion, it became a moral experience. It became as I say, an epistemological experience. In other words, knowledge. And it became an ontological experience. In other words, how does it affect your beingness? The fact that you believe that you are alive. How does that? And also, sir, today there is this phenomenology and existentialism, that lived experience. And so these things brought me to a more serious and a more comprehensive view. And so I shifted from the lyrical, not that I stopped writing the lyrical still marks important, but there the metaphor is closer to life and its issues. But the battle and the struggle, shall I say, between the poet and the subject matter. In poetry we say the struggle between the word and the world. That is reflected in my epics, I think. This is what
interesting, very interesting. So we may summarize different phases of poetry, like first it was influenced by nature and you wanted to write more about nature. Then it was a lyrical phase. Now it's more of narrating epics in your poetry. Am I right?
You have understood it very well, and I congratulate you for grasping the essence. Makes things very easy for the man on the other end of the interview.
But you can add if you want to add anything.
I would, when you feel it's appropriate, read out, and that will be the answer, a few of the early poems, small ones, to show where I was, and then later on perhaps where we have reached as a result of the evolution of my thought. And so my first book was The Dreaming Clay Jar. And sir, can I read the first poem? Sure. The very first poem of the very first volume.
Please.
1993. A lifetime spent in distancing myself from you, until distance itself began to dictate proximity.
Wow.
How fragile everything is about one's ears. Our eyes break in our own hands. Our eyes break in our own hands. Who can tell if the whole of one is forever alive? Who can tell if the whole of one is forever alive? Sometimes mere fragments of the dreaming clay jar begin to spark.
Wow, beautiful.
And can I also, again, the imagery from nature, the clay jar as a pottery, an image. Now the imagery from the floods, the kiss of the libertine waters entering the privacy of homes like lizards licking the walls of tenements. A million serpentine tongues carving patterns of change on the beleaguered earth. Floods have their own mystery beyond the will of the wandering waters.
Wow.
Long after the floods recede, trees are known to fall headlong. So the change from in nature through metaphor.
Beautiful.
And one more poem, if I can read. Imprisoned Air. This is also the early poems, the early books that I wrote. Imprisoned Air. Each breath is a bird leaving the body's nest for freedom's sky.
Oh.
We live on imprisoned air and die when it is free. One man's freedom is another man's slavery.
Ah,
The most passionate stuff of life cohabits with the coldest. Those who seek finalities, seek finalities merely wave flags and cannot torch even a flame, and cannot torch a flame. Inspirations die if one learns to do without them.
wow.
In the humility of abnegation, there is hope of understanding. Beyond the cloud of tinsel, the search for silver lining begins. Words are amiss when life and death hang in the balance.
Oh,
I have had,
beautiful.
through nature, a fascination with the phenomenon of death and life. They are very important. We neglect them, but both are important in lives, and that is why I revert back to this. Yeah, do you want me to read one more poem? Or
Okay, please, please.
this is Cactus in My Throat. The imageries that I use, metaphors for what I feel. When water vanishes from riverbeds of the eyes, and the boulder in the heart's well is struck, only a cloudburst can relieve life's rigor mortis.
Oh,
I was writing, question you asked, why do you write? I was writing, I was writhing to speak from the heart. But the cactus in my throat grew long, stinging me comatose. Only a thin line divides commitment from indifference. Once trespassed, words cease to flow. The lifelike ambience and behavior of words and the world.
beautiful poems. And I can see these are typed in a bigger font, and perhaps you were telling that your wife's typed it for you because, and I also read her essays and reviews on your poetry, very insightful essays. So I think she has also contributed a lot in bringing out your poetry, giving you feedback, reviews, and all that.
When I wrote these poems, I had a better eyesight, but now I am a victim of what is called macular degeneration. So today, if I'm publishing books, it's because of my wife. Her name is Ejaz Rahim, and she's a first-class first from Peshawar University in English literature.
So we have discussed fairly enough about poetry, but still that question still is in my mind. What's your own view of poetry as well? You have discussed various points of view of different poets, and I can understand what you yourself consider poetry is, but I would like to hear it from you.
And I think that the answer is much more found in this than if I were to say, because these are the themes. This is the issue that troubled me. This is where I got inspiration from. And these are 5 poets, modern poets, that I will refer to.
Please.
And just in a sentence or so, what do they say and why does it echo with me? And why does it give the direction to my poetry in my own way? Things that I pick up from there. And these are Robert Lowell, an American poet, Wallace Stevens, again an American poet, William Blake, then T.S. Eliot. How can you look at modern age and the issues of today of civilization and culture and religion and faith without T.S. Eliot? And then, of course, Allama Iqbal. These I consider the formative factors. A minute each on these, and you will understand where I come from and where I'm going. Robert Lowell believes that, and he was a very religious man.
Yeah.
But when he gave his thought to life, he thought that he fell into doubt.
Oh.
And so, his poems, like his books, they speak about reverting from faith, and that would give him joy and happiness. But when he saw the state of the world, there was sorrow and pain that he thought he could not, and then so he could not control. He could not control with poetry. He could not control with words. So he lost faith in even words. But towards the end of his life, and towards the end, he thought that the only thing that will give life to a cold fact, a dry fact of science, a dry fact of history, what is it, sir? It is the poetic word. But that word has to seep into the self. And so, again, he says there is a self which is very important. We say of Iqbal, but believe me, here is a man who says that the self is what will give life to the word and make it meaningful. Then you have Wallace Stevens, and Wallace Stevens has written, his first book was called Harmonium, and it asks a very good question. It says, how will singing change the world? And so he also lost. Sir, losing faith in the word has become part of modern literature. When they look at pain and sorrow and no answers to their question, again, they lose faith. But towards the very end of his life, and the last book that came out, the only hope that glimmers, it's not there as a full moon, it glimmers, is the fact that the joy will only come from the creative word. That is where perfection will come. It's not possible in the world of actuality, but this is the one that will reflect back on it. I would say that William Blake gave me the other perspective. He's a transcendentalist poet. He is a man who celebrates the work of nature, whether it is in the form of a tiger or it is in the form of a lamb. So these are binaries.
Yeah.
But he did not lose faith. He was transcendent. He says there is wisdom in this, and he kept his faith. So I have two poets where the words lose meaning, and only towards the end they become a glimmer. And I have a poet who fascinates me at the same time. You will say that this is a contradiction. Yes, there is a contradiction. Walt Whitman says, do I contradict myself? Yes, I contradict myself. I am a river. I contain contradictions. So sir, Blake for me became important because he kept his faith. And why did he keep his faith? And what made it? He says there are miracles in life, but you have to accept miracle, but you also have to accept mystery of life. So the giving of a station of meaning to mystery, today's science is no longer just explanations. Science is mystery also. Matter has become mysterious. Life is mystery. Pain is there, but there is mystery that the joy can come at the end of pain. Suffering is there. So this is where poetry begins to have meaning. But here we have a poet who is transcendental. Now, sir, what do I find about Iqbal, who has really, in a sense, changed me? Because for him, sir, today, the self, Iqbal's stress on self, that whether it is joy or sorrow or suffering or this or that, unless you turn yourself into a self which is capable of the knowledge experience, epistemological experience, which is capable of the beingness, sense of being, philosophical experience, the ontological experience, unless it has actual experience, the living experience, which I call phenomenology, the phenomenological experience, And that experience becomes aesthetic. You bring them together and it should be aesthetic experience. So self is a unit of time and space. Today's science is all discussion on science and space. Iqbal says it is a unit of time and space which is capable of these experiences. When you do that, the moral experience, the aesthetic experience, and Iqbal helped me to understand that the sources of knowledge are not only reason, they are emotion, they are faith, there's a sense of wonder, there is the basic human condition of joy, of pain, of suffering, of loneliness, of alienation. And yet at the end of the day, you bring them together through poetry, through that one aesthetic act which gives fresh meaning to life. And then finally what brought me to Iqbal, and I'll conclude with that because that concludes my whole vision of poetry. He says, you know, these other poets, when they come to the word and the shadow that word throws on the page, and they feel it is beautiful, it is comforting, it is giving meaning, they are satisfied. But Iqbal says something else. He says, no, the eyes are important, the head is important, the heart is important, but the hand is also very important. We must act for change. That act for change and verse becoming hands, this is what I thought is the function of poetry.
There are two questions probably. I mean, the search for change was also kind of an anxiety of a modern man who always wanted to change the world, and the world has changed, but it may not have changed for the better. Number two, the concept of man which you have just shared with us, which Iqbal has presented, it may be an exception, but most of the men cannot be so rounded personalities that they have cerebral capabilities, emotional discipline, imagination. I mean, you can find it in exceptional people, not in everyday human beings. You have an institution which is meant to shape people's psychology and their attitudes and behavior in a certain way. In a normal society, most of the people would be having different kind of inclinations, and unless there is some external force to shape them according to the concept which Iqbal has presented, they may not be like that.
Yes, I think that one truth that poetry struggles with is struggle itself.
Okay.
Change is not guaranteed. It has not been guaranteed by technology, which is a force from outside. You are saying it's something from outside. Technology changes. Has it changed human beings' hearts?
Yeah.
I'm not so sure. There would be no Gazas if there were, if just technology were enough to change people.
Yeah, but I didn't say that.
No, you didn't say that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it to myself.
Okay.
Technology has not been able to deliver. Science has not. The only possibility is that can you work on a self? I think there is broad consensus that inner change comes from religion, comes from faith, but in a time when technology and science are working against that, what is that one force that can still talk to, dialogue with us? And there is a certain amount of feeling that poetry, the creative word, the creation of fresh meaning with old words is probably some answer to it. Yeah. Now, of course, not everybody can be Allama, not everybody can be Iqbal, not everybody can be Shakespeare, but those who can be, those who have the capacities, for them it is important to look at what is there in life, what is there in literature, what is there that can come together for poetry. Can I just end up this portion by saying that at the end of the day, whether it is poetry, philosophy, science, politics, aesthetics, technology, one issue is very clear, that humanity will find self-realization and joy of existence only when there is the presence of a sense of justice, when there is a presence of a sense of sympathy for others, and the great and powerful force that we forget, the power of love. And this is what poetry teaches, that in the end it is these forces which will bring self-realization, the sense of justice, the sense of freedom, the joy that you will get in freedom for yourself and for your fellow man. Does it look very difficult, or has there been, this has been the struggle of history. And I think that poetry is a way of looking at history to see whether it rhymes with poetry, and that effort has to be there. And that's why, for instance, that's why I would wish to add a word or a sentence to the whole lexicon of poetry, or I would like to keep quiet otherwise.
Many people think that ultimate reality of life is perhaps paradoxes. Would you like to say something on that?
Yes, I think I would agree with that. I would say that there is, and these days we say this is plurality.
Okay.
Even the senses have plurality. There is a Kashmiri poet by the name of Arifa Lalla Arifa, and her Hindu name was Deed. And she says that she's one of those who doesn't say that at the end what we do is we reject the body, we reject the senses and join divinity. She says no. These very senses, these very instincts have to be trained to understand the beauty of this world and the potential of beauty, and to struggle for that beauty in this world through love. I thought that was a very nice thought, and I sometimes think that Iqbal's, who is himself a Kashmiri, when he talks
You're also Kashmiri.
I also have Kashmiri roots, and I'm very influenced by this lady. She's a saintly lady of the 10th century. This is when Al-Ghazali was working in Baghdad. And look at the beauty of thought, that no, plurality is also a gift of nature. That if there is variety and there is, it adds to the struggle, it adds meaning to the struggle. But in the end, the struggle is for beauty, the struggle is for love, the struggle is for a higher degree of living rather than a lower degree of living. This is the message. And I think that I find this message even in Iqbal's poetry, although I don't know whether they have read each other or no, but this is the message that comes out. I feel, yes, sir, there will be no paradise. One thing is sure, there will be no paradise, but the dream of paradise will not go away. And can we contribute to that? And we cannot contribute to that unless the word and the world can act as a bridge for at least recognizing the importance of justice, recognizing the importance of truth, recognizing the importance of beauty, and recognizing the importance of freedom and love. I call this my pentagon for poetry. These are
Pentagon is not a good metaphor for poetry.
It's not a good metaphor, and I want to change the significance of that metaphor. That pentagon should, I go back to the pentagon of the Greeks rather than the present day pentagon. This is the pentagon that we should be banking upon, not the pentagon of force and forced obedience and cultural change from top and without it attending to the heart. So this pentagon of love and beauty and truth and freedom, this is the one that we should be attempting, and this is the field of poetry.
I would like to discuss two of your long poems, I Confucius and I Buddha. But first, I Buddha. There are a lot of things I have noted down which people have written about those poems, particularly Jilani Kamran Sahab. And they say that you have kind of made Buddha relevant to the contemporary world as well. Do you think his message was so universal that it can transcend limitations of time? More than 2000 years perhaps he was here, and he is still relevant in our world, and why not we can also look up to the modern philosophers who have written might be similar to what he had said about meaninglessness of the world. I mean, post World War, many philosophers have written about this. So can you just explain?
The moral experience of Buddha remains to this day, and that's what we celebrate. The Buddhists celebrate him for so many other spiritual things, but I have not gone into the spiritual side. I have gone into the moral side of Buddha, because I honestly believe that there's a tribute I've paid to Buddha, sir. You lived for centuries under the earth's roof. This is the buried Buddha. You lived for centuries under the earth's roof, and having consummated your round of silence, are up again, erect and eloquent, even though in stone. We who are ruin deaf, delude ourselves to think we are listening over taxillas of time. Sir, that the message is eternal. People have to listen. That's what I'm saying. That's my answer to you, sir.
Thank you.
Through a poem.
Yeah. Please correct me if I'm wrong. His teachings deal with governance and moral principles. Do you think, and this is your very well appreciated poem, you were invited to United States for some event related to your poetry, and your poem has also been translated into Chinese language. So do you think poetry is the right medium for issues related to governance and other things?
As I said, sir, poetry is a medium where this unit of time and space, the self, unless it experiences knowledge, unless it experiences pain, the existential, things about human life, the human condition as they call it, unless it looks at things almost as if they are part of your being, no change is possible. And Confucius is one man who, he was there in the warring states. There was, one king entering lawlessness, entering the kingdoms of other kings. The plight of the poor was finished, and that's quite clear from the history of China. This is a man who said, power will only be humanized when people are educated. So he is the man. Why is Confucius remembered? The man who says that the very purpose of the state is lost. The very purpose of social organization is lost. The very purpose of human organization is lost if you leave people illiterate. That education is the first priority. What a message, sir, given 500 years before Christ, and the message resonates even today. And therefore, that poem in the universities of the world occupies a very important part. Again, why is education important? First, it leads to the liberation of the heart. Secondly, it leads to the liberation of the mind. Thirdly, it brings these two things together, and what happens? Then you start working for justice. You start working for peace. You start working for amity between states. And so, sir, it's a universal message. And therefore, should it be, I think the newspapers are full of articles. It has made no difference. I honestly believe that a poem read in a classroom or by a reader who is interested in poetry changes that reader much more than any amount of lectures that he reads in newspapers. That's my answer to your question.
Thank you. At the end of our program, we would like to hear some more poems from you. Yeah.
Downhill is automatic, like the downside of hatred's free fall. It is opposing gravity that taxes your feet and free will.
Wow.
Is it any good trying to go up and down when least sufferance comes from staying put? You may call it suspended animation
No.
to wit. Unless, of course, they treat you like carcass, like in Gaza. Unless they treat you like carcass in a cannibal's game, in which case it's free for all and all the same whether you are right or wrong or mad or sane. Though gory images, so this is the stage where I change from just the natural descriptions to some moral issues. Though gory images distress, they also cull some sense of pain at the heartlessness at the heart of things.
Wow.
For in my eyes, true martyrdom is not the fact of having died, but having tried in vain.
Beautiful.
There, center stage, still hangs one whose name is Mansoor, who every time they bring him down, he calmly reascends again.
Sir, I thoroughly enjoyed conversation with you, and I'm sure our viewers did too. Thank you very much for being with us this evening.
I'm very grateful, sir. I think I enjoyed it as much, in fact, more than what you might have. I'm grateful, sir.
So thank you viewers for watching this program. See you next Sunday, same time.